I need a boyfriend by tomorrow. The billionaire heard it and made the most unexpected decision. The elevator glided silently to the top floor of the building, opening directly into the penthouse. Everything inside was as it always was, immaculate, quiet, and predictable. Jonathan Blake didn't like surprises. At 45, he had engineered a life where nothing happened unless he allowed it. Every surface gleamed. Every moment of his day was accounted for. Order was peace. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering sprawl of Miami at night, the city buzzing far beneath him like a different planet. In one hand, he held a glass of neat scotch. In the other, the silence of his own thoughts. The apartment echoed faintly with life. Barely. Rebecca was finishing her work in the laundry room down the hall, like she did every Tuesday evening. She'd been with him for 3 years, and he could count on one hand the number of full conversations they'd had. She came in, cleaned, organized, and left. Quiet, efficient, invisible. But tonight, there was a sound, something not part of the usual routine. Jonathan turned his head toward the hallway. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but when a person hears someone crying through a cracked door, ignoring it isn't so easy. "I don't know what to do, Mel." Rebecca's voice trembled. She's already sick, and now she's freaking out that I'm showing up alone. She says it'll embarrass her at the wedding. A pause, muffled sobbing. "No, I don't have anyone." "Who would I bring? My boss? He barely knows I exist. And even if I asked, no, that would be insane." Jonathan's brow furrowed. He backed away, his usual instinct to retreat into detachment kicking in. Still, the sound of her crying lingered. He tried to drink it away, but the ice had melted, and so had his indifference. The next morning, Rebecca moved through the kitchen like nothing had happened, stacking Jonathan's breakfast plate precisely where he liked it. Her face was calm, composed, the previous night seemingly forgotten or buried. But Jonathan had heard too much to unhear it. He stood at the counter with his coffee mug, watching her more closely than usual. Noticing. "Rebecca," he said suddenly, his voice cutting into the morning hush. She looked up, startled. "Yes, Mr. Blake." He hesitated. He never called her by name. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years this spring." "Right," he said. He set his mug down. "I overheard something last night." Her face drained of color instantly. "You did?" "You were upset, talking about a wedding." Rebecca pressed her lips together, eyes darting away. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "You don't have to apologize." Jonathan leaned slightly forward. "It's your sister's wedding?" She nodded slowly, still not meeting his eyes. "Next weekend, back home in Georgia. And your family expects you to bring someone?" She let out a short, humorless laugh. "My mom, mostly. She's old-fashioned. Sick, too. She thinks me being single means I'm unhappy. Or broken. I told her I was seeing someone just to keep her calm. Now she wants to meet him. And you don't have anyone." Rebecca stiffened. "No, I don't. But I'll figure it out." Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, fingers lightly tapping his mug. Then, with no dramatic flair or fanfare, he said, "I could go with you." She blinked. "What?" "I could pretend to be your boyfriend. For the wedding." Rebecca stared at him as if he'd spoken in code. You're joking." "I'm not." "You're my boss." "I know. We barely talk." "That's true. Why would you offer to do something like that?" Jonathan looked genuinely thoughtful, like he wasn't quite sure himself. "You were in pain. I heard it. And I realized I didn't like it." Rebecca's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes searched his face, trying to detect a punchline, a trap, or some sort of hidden agenda, but Jonathan wasn't smiling. He was just waiting. "It's in 2 days," she said finally, almost in a whisper. "I can rearrange my schedule. You'd have to stay in my family's house." I can handle that. And pretend we're together. He nodded once. Yes. Rebecca sat down at the edge of the stool near the counter, still watching him. You understand how crazy this is, right? You don't even go to company holiday parties. You don't talk to anyone outside of meetings. You once told the doorman to stop wishing you a good day because it was inefficient small talk. Jonathan looked vaguely uncomfortable. I did say that. So, why are you doing this? Another silence, then quietly. Maybe I'm tired of being efficient. Rebecca let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There were so many reasons to say no, so many layers between them. But under the strangeness of the moment, there was something else. A flicker of sincerity she hadn't expected. She thought of her mother's tired eyes, of her sister's pleading voice, of the impossible awkwardness of arriving alone. And then she looked at Jonathan, this man she cleaned for every week, who never spoke more than necessary, who never noticed the small touches she left around his apartment, and realized he was offering her something no one else ever had. A way out. A rescue, strange as it was. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. Jonathan gave the smallest of nods, but something in his expression shifted. A wall cracking just slightly. All right then, he said, voice steady. I'll need the details. Rebecca stood, still stunned. Right. I'll text them to you. Thank you, really. He looked at her and for once, not through her. Don't thank me yet. And just like that, the perfect order of Jonathan Blake's life began to unravel, starting with one unexpected yes. The plane touched down in Georgia just past noon on Friday, the sky overcast and the air thick with southern humidity. Jonathan stepped out of the airport terminal in a perfectly tailored blazer and Italian loafers, pulling a sleek carry-on behind him. Next to him, Rebecca wore a simple navy dress and flats, her hair loose, her shoulders tense. She hadn't spoken much on the flight. He hadn't expected her to, but now, standing outside waiting for her sister to pick them up, she fidgeted with the strap of her purse and exhaled slowly. They're going to stare, she muttered. Jonathan glanced at her. At what? At you, at us. My family's not used to people like you. People like me? He echoed, mildly amused. Miami millionaires in designer shoes, she said without looking at him. Jonathan looked down at his shoes. Should I have worn boots? Rebecca gave a small laugh despite herself. Too late now. A red SUV pulled up to the curb, honking once. The driver's window rolled down to reveal a bright-eyed brunette waving enthusiastically. Bex, she squealed. Get in here, you stranger. That's Melissa, Rebecca said with a sigh. I guessed, Jonathan replied. They loaded into the car, Melissa talking a mile a minute, stealing glances at Jonathan through the rearview mirror. And you must be Jonathan, she said with a smirk. Rebecca wasn't kidding. You're hot. Rebecca choked on her own breath. Jonathan blinked. Melissa, Rebecca hissed. I'm just saying, and she didn't even tell me he was British. I'm not, Jonathan corrected politely. Could have fooled me. You sound like you read poems at breakfast. Rebecca closed her eyes. It's going to be a long weekend. Her family's house sat on a quiet street in a small town Rebecca had never planned on returning to. It was warm, worn in, cluttered with family photos and the faint smell of lemon furniture polish. Jonathan stood in the foyer, glancing around at floral wallpaper and framed graduation pictures. A woman with silver hair and sharp eyes entered from the living room. She took one look at Jonathan, then turned to Rebecca with a thin smile. You didn't tell me he was a movie star. This is Jonathan, Rebecca said, keeping her tone steady. Jonathan, this is my mother, Margaret. Margaret gave a small nod. Pleasure. Jonathan offered his hand. Likewise, ma'am. Ma'am. Rebecca blinked. That was new. They spent the afternoon settling in, or rather, Jonathan attempted to adjust to a world filled with casseroles, mismatched throw pillows, and unfiltered curiosity. At dinner, the table was crowded with family members, all subtly, and not so subtly, evaluating him. "So, Jonathan," said Rebecca's uncle between bites of mashed potatoes, "what do you do?" "I run a software company," Jonathan replied, "in Miami." "Software," the uncle repeated, unimpressed. "So, like apps?" "Among other things." "Do you hunt?" Rebecca nearly dropped her fork. "No," Jonathan said calmly. "But I've read about it." Her cousin snorted. "You read about it?" Jonathan smiled. "I read a lot." By the time dessert rolled around, Jonathan had charmed 2 aunts, confused 3 cousins, and somehow gotten Margaret to laugh. Later that evening, Rebecca stood outside on the porch, arms crossed as she watched fireflies spark in the distance. Jonathan joined her quietly. "You handled them well," she said without turning. "I've been through worse board meetings." "You really didn't have to come, you know." He looked at her. "You said that already." "I came anyway." She studied him in the dim porch light. "You don't talk like this in Miami." "I don't have anyone to talk to." Rebecca opened her mouth, then closed it again. Inside, someone called her name. "Rehearsal dinner's tomorrow night," she said, changing the subject. "It's going to be worse." "I look forward to it." "You're insane." "Possibly." The rehearsal dinner was held in the community center gym, decorated with fairy lights and mason jar centerpieces. A local barbecue place catered, and someone set up a playlist full of early 2000s pop hits. Jonathan stood by Rebecca's side, holding a paper plate like it might disintegrate. She caught him eyeing a crock-pot full of cheese dip with open suspicion. "Scared of Velveeta?" she teased. "I'm terrified," he admitted. She laughed, and he smiled. Really smiled. She'd never seen him look like that. It caught her off guard. Someone shouted her name from across the room. A group of cousins waved them over. "No turning back now," she murmured. They were dragged into a circle of folding chairs. Rebecca's cousin grinned devilishly. "All right, everyone. We're playing the newlywed game, wedding edition." Rebecca froze. "No, absolutely not." "Oh, come on," Melissa pleaded. "You two are the perfect couple. Let's see how well you really know each other." The question started harmlessly. "What's Rebecca's favorite movie?" Jonathan answered, "The Sound of Music," with unsettling accuracy. Rebecca blinked at him. "How did you know that?" "You hum Edelweiss when you clean the windows," he said simply. "Next question. Who said I love you first?" Jonathan hesitated. "Rebecca did." She stared at him, stunned. "You made that up?" "Yes," he said calmly. "But it sounded romantic." Everyone laughed. Someone passed him a beer, then came the dare. "Final round," said the cousin. "Let's see a kiss, a real one." Rebecca's stomach dropped. "I don't think—" "Come on," Melissa egged them on. "Just one kiss. It's not like you haven't done it before, right?" Jonathan looked at Rebecca. "Only if you're okay with it." Her heart thudded in her chest. Every part of this weekend was out of her control. But when she looked at him, this man she thought she knew now standing beside her like some strange, steady anchor, something inside her shifted. She nodded slowly. He leaned in. She met him halfway. The kiss was supposed to be short, awkward, performative. But the moment their lips touched, time dropped away. The sounds of the party blurred into silence. His hand rested gently at her jaw. Her fingers curled into his sleeve. The kiss deepened, for just a second too long. When they pulled apart, neither could speak. The room erupted in cheers, but Rebecca hardly heard them. Jonathan looked at her, his face unreadable. She looked back, breath caught in her throat. Whatever that was, it wasn't pretend. The plane ride home was quiet. Rebecca stared out the window, headphones in but no music playing, while Jonathan sat beside her, flipping absent-mindedly through a magazine he wasn't reading. They hadn't spoken about the kiss. Not during the ride back to the airport, not while waiting at the gate, not once since. Back in Miami, the city lights welcomed them with cold precision. The skyline was beautiful, sharp, glassy, untouchable, just like the life they were returning to. By the time they reached the penthouse, it was late. Rebecca stepped inside first, setting down her overnight bag, and instinctively moved toward the guest room to grab the laundry she hadn't finished folding before they left. Then she stopped. This wasn't a normal day at work, and whatever had happened between them over the weekend, it didn't belong here. "I'll come by tomorrow to finish things up," she said, turning to face him. Jonathan stood by the door, keys still in hand. "You don't have to." Her eyebrows lifted. "It's Monday." "That's what I do on Mondays." He looked at her, a strange tension in his jaw. "Maybe we should talk." Rebecca's stomach tightened. About what? But she already knew. "The kiss," he said quietly, "and the fact that it didn't feel fake." Silence pressed in between them. "I don't know what it was," she admitted after a moment. "I don't know what to do with it." Jonathan walked into the living room and sat down, elbows on his knees. "Neither do I. But I don't want to pretend nothing happened." Rebecca stayed by the kitchen island, the cool granite under her fingertips grounding her. "You're my boss. That hasn't changed." "I don't want you to be my employee anymore," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me? I don't mean you're fired." He stood, walked toward her slowly. "I mean, I want to try something real, between us. And I can't do that while you're still working here. It creates a wall I don't want anymore." Rebecca stared at him. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to think, to be rational. "This is insane," she whispered. "You don't even know me. Not really." "I'm trying to," he said. "I want to." "What is this to you?" she asked, voice rising. "A vacation crush? A temporary thrill? You kissed me once and now you're ready to change our entire dynamic?" Jonathan didn't flinch. "You think I'd risk ruining my carefully constructed life for a thrill?" "You don't risk things," she shot back. "That's your whole thing." "I didn't," he said. "Until you." Rebecca's hands dropped to her sides. The space between them was suddenly charged, raw, vulnerable. "I've spent 3 years being invisible in this apartment," she said. "And now suddenly I'm not. That's confusing." "I know," he said, "and I don't expect you to trust it overnight. But I can't go back to how things were." She looked down at her feet, then back up. "What are you asking exactly?" "I'm asking you to stop being my housekeeper," he said, "and let me take you out. On a real date. No pretending." Rebecca swallowed hard. The walls she'd built around herself, the ones that kept her grounded and safe, were trembling. He was serious, more serious than she'd ever seen him. "I'd need time," she said slowly, "and space." "You'll have both." "No secrets," she added. "None. And boundaries. Clear ones." "Of course." Rebecca crossed her arms. "This isn't a Cinderella story. I don't need to be rescued." Jonathan's voice was steady. "I know. I don't want to rescue you. I want to know you." The words were so simple, so sincere, they disarmed her completely. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and said, "Fine. One date." When she opened her eyes again, he was smiling. Not a smug grin, not a polished smirk, but something rare and real. "All right," he said. "One date." They agreed to take a few days before seeing each other again. Rebecca officially quit, leaving her last paycheck unopened on the kitchen counter. She needed distance to figure out who she was outside the walls of that penthouse. Jonathan, for his part, didn't push. but she could feel his presence everywhere. Texts that simply said, "Thinking of you." A call she didn't expect just to ask how her day was. A surprise delivery of her favorite chai from the corner cafe. 3 days later, he picked her up in a casual navy button-down and jeans, looking somehow younger without a tie and stiff schedule. They didn't go to a 5-star restaurant or a rooftop bar. Instead, he took her to a quiet little bookstore cafe tucked behind a garden center in Coconut Grove. "I thought this would be less overwhelming," he said as they sat down with tea and a pastry to share. Rebecca looked around. String lights twinkled above mismatched tables. A soft jazz playlist played in the background. You were right. They talked, really talked, about childhood, about regrets, about favorite books and terrible dates. Jonathan confessed he'd once tried online dating for exactly 6 hours before deleting everything. Rebecca laughed so hard she nearly spilled her tea. "Let me guess, too inefficient?" He grinned. "I didn't even make it past the first icebreaker question." "What's your biggest weakness?" I wrote. "People who don't use Oxford commas." "You are a menace," she said, shaking her head. "And you're still here," he replied, his tone warm. For the first time, Rebecca stopped seeing him as Mr. Blake, the silent figure behind the glass desk and spotless floors. He was just Jonathan now, smart, awkward, maybe a little lonely, but real. When the evening wound down, he walked her to her door like a gentleman from another era. "No kiss tonight," she said gently. "Not yet." "I wasn't going to try," he said. "But I will ask if I can see you again." Rebecca nodded. "You can." As he walked away, she stood at her doorway for a long moment, heart lighter than it had been in years. This wasn't a game anymore. It was the beginning of something real. It didn't take long for their quiet little romance to collide with the noise of Jonathan's world. Dinners at low-key cafes were replaced by invitations to gallery openings and benefit galas. Rebecca found herself surrounded by people with designer names she couldn't pronounce and resumes that read like magazine features. Everyone smiled politely. Some were even kind, but underneath it she could feel it, the judgment. She never belonged in this world, and no amount of soft kisses or shared secrets could change that. At a rooftop cocktail party in South Beach, Jonathan introduced her to a business associate and his wife, both of whom assessed her in one slow, sweeping glance. "So this is the woman who's tamed Jonathan Blake," the wife said, sipping champagne. "She's charming," the man added, eyes not quite meeting hers. Charming. The word echoed all the way home. They rode back in silence. Jonathan kept stealing glances at her, but Rebecca stared out the car window, arms crossed tight. "You okay?" he asked gently. "I'm fine." "Rebecca." "I said I'm fine." He sighed. "You don't have to prove anything to them. You're not here to impress anyone." She turned to him then, eyes flashing. "That's easy for you to say. You are them." Jonathan blinked, caught off guard. "You walk into those rooms and everyone already respects you. Me? I'm just a curiosity. A +1 people whisper about. That's not how I see you." "But that's how they do," she said, voice low but sharp. "And sooner or later you'll care what they think." They didn't speak the rest of the ride. The next morning, she didn't answer his calls. By the afternoon, she sent a message saying she needed space. Jonathan sat alone in his penthouse, looking around at the life he had built with such precision. None of it mattered anymore. Not the view, not the quiet, not the spotless perfection. He missed her. He missed them. He thought of her laugh, her brutal honesty, the way she took up space in his world and made it better. He couldn't lose her over this. That evening, Rebecca sat in the back of her business communications class at a small college in Coral Gables. She took notes, half listening, mind buzzing with doubt and restlessness. When the professor opened the floor for a Q&A, the classroom door opened, and in walked Jonathan. He scanned the room, found her, and walked straight to the front. "Excuse me," he said to the professor. "May I borrow a moment?" The professor, clearly startled, nodded. Jonathan turned to the room, then to Rebecca. "I wasn't supposed to know she was in this class," he said. "She never told me she was studying business. Or that she's been doing it after hours, after cleaning my house, after putting everyone else first." Rebecca's cheeks burned. "Jonathan," he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish." He looked at her, and for once he wasn't polished or composed. He looked wrecked. "I've spent my whole life chasing control, comfort, order, and I almost let that cost me the best thing that's ever happened to me." The classroom was dead silent. "You don't need my approval, or my money, or my world. You've built your own, and I don't want you to fit into my life. I want to build a new one with you. One where we both belong." Rebecca stared at him, heart hammering in her chest. "Please," he said softly, "come home." A few students clapped. Someone whistled. Rebecca stood, grabbed her bag, and walked down the aisle, straight into his arms. Later that night, back at his place, they sat on the couch in silence. "I'm not quitting school," she said. "Good. And I'm not coming back to work for you. Not ever. I wouldn't ask you to." She looked at him. "You meant what you said?" He reached out, brushing her cheek with his knuckles. "Every word." Rebecca leaned into him, eyes closed. "I'm scared. So am I. But I want this," she whispered. "So do I." They kissed then, softly at first, then with the kind of intensity that spoke of months of tension, longing, fear. His hands found her waist. Her fingers slid into his hair. There was no performance this time, no audience, just them. Raw. Real. They moved together, slowly, tenderly, like a promise unfolding between them. And when they lay tangled in each other afterward, bare in every sense of the word, Jonathan whispered, "I love you." Rebecca turned to face him, her voice barely audible. "I love you too." Weeks later, Rebecca packed the last of her uniforms into a donation bag. She moved into a small apartment not far from campus, and Jonathan helped her build bookshelves while she argued about whether or not he should be allowed to hang curtains. They still didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what their future would look like, but they were figuring it out, together, not as boss and employee, not as a charade, but as partners. For the first time, both of them were exactly where they wanted to be,